for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I am Darren Gibson, your host today. We're going to spend the entire hour talking about the presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. What a sight it was to see. We saw everything. Fights about abortion, the economy, and people eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio, which is a wild accusation. Absolutely untrue, but still made for fun memes on the internet. So we will talk about all that and more this entire hour of the show. Before we get started, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We are recording this show on Thursday, September 12th, 2024. We are one day removed from the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris were both there, as was President Joe Biden. J.D. Vance was there as well. That guy gives me the creeps. All right. Tell you what, let's go ahead and talk about the debate here, because this might not happen again based on Donald Trump's performance at the debate. Let's say he didn't do very well and just be done with it. This is Steve Peoples, Jonathan J. Cooper, and Nicholas Riccardi writing for the Associated Press. This is dated September 11th out of Washington. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris faced each other on the debate stage for the first and possibly the last time. Yeah, I would say if Trump had his way, it would definitely be the last time, because Donald Trump failed miserably. Almost every pundit there is, including this one right here, said that Kamala Harris very easily won the debate over Donald Trump. The Democratic vice president opened Tuesday night's face-off with a power move, marching across the stage to Trump's lectern to shake his hand. She introduced herself as Kamala Harris as the pair met for the first time ever. She said to him, quote, "Let's have a good debate," end of quote. Trump responded, quote, "Nice to see you have fun," end of quote. The exchange set the tone for the 90-minute debate to come. Harris controlled the conversation at times, baiting Trump with jabs at his economic policy, his refusal to concede his 2020 election loss, and even his performance at his rallies. Trump, while measured early on, grew more annoyed as the night went on, and one significant moment played out after the two candidates left the stage, when mega pop star Taylor Swift said she'll vote for Harris. We'll talk about this in a little bit here. In her first answer, the former prosecutor said Trump's tariffs would effectively create a sales tax on the middle class. She soon accused Trump of presiding over the worst attack on American democracy since the Civil War, the Capitol riot traitorous riot on January 6, 2021. I added traitorous because those people are and were traitors. She charged him with telling women what they could do with their bodies, and she mocked Trump's praise of dictators, quote, who would eat you for lunch, end of quote. Harris effectively controlled much of the conversation with such attacks and baited Trump into responses that were at times vents and at others reminders of his wild rhetoric and fixation on the past. Harris said of the 2020 race that Trump lost to Democrat Joe Biden, but still insists he won, quote, you did, in fact, lose that election. Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. End of quote. Which was great. But Harris may have gotten under her opponent's skin the most when she went after his performance at his rallies, noting that people often leave early. Growing visibly irritated, Trump insisted that his rallies were larger than hers. A smiling Harris frequently shifted her message from Trump back to the American people. Harris said, quote, you will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your needs and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first. End of quote. That was a great line. That was wonderful. Trump was often on defense, but he did drive the core message of his campaign. Inflation and immigration are hammering Americans. Trump said that immigrants have, quote, destroyed the fabric of our country, end of quote. Really? He repeatedly tied Harris to Biden. He said, quote, she is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had. A horrible economy because inflation has made us so bad, and she can't get away with that, end of quote. Harris responded, quote, clearly I am not Joe Biden and I am certainly not Donald Trump, and what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country, end of quote. Yeah, you got that right. Ugh. Trump also went after Harris for moving away from some of the progressive positions she took in the 2020 presidential primary, urging voters not to believe the more moderate tone she's striking in this campaign. Trump said, quote, she's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. End of quote. I was going to send her a MAGA hat. No, you weren't. You're too cheap to do that. One of the most consequential moments came in a post on one of the most followed accounts on Instagram moments after the debate ended. Taylor Swift has a loyal following among young women, a demographic Harris needs to turn on in big numbers. She called Harris a gifted leader, telling her fans to do their research and make their own decisions. But, quote, I've done my research and I've made my choice, end of quote. Good for Taylor Swift. Yep, made the right choice, my opinion. ABC moderator David Muir asked Trump point blank about his allegation last month that Harris had belatedly turned black. Harris is black and South Asian and a graduate of Howard University, a historically black school in Washington. Trump tried to play down the matter by saying, quote, I don't care what she is, you make a big deal out of something, I couldn't care less, end of quote. Yeah, he said that. Harris, however, had her opening, and she rattled off a long list of Trump's racial controversies, his legal settlement for discrimination against prospective black tenants at his New York apartment buildings in the 1970s, his ad calling for the execution of black and Latino teenagers who were wrongly arrested in the Central Park jogger case in the 1980s, and his false claims that former President Barack Obama was not born in the United States. Harris said, quote, I think the American people want something better than that, want better than this, end of quote. Trump accused Harris of trying to divide people and dismiss her claims as dated and irrelevant. He said, quote, this is a person that has to stretch back 40, 50 years ago because there's nothing now, end of quote. Oh, there's a lot now there, buddy. You orange bastard. Yeah, there's a lot there now. Oh, my God. Black jobs. Yeah, let's start with black jobs there, Trump. Unreal. What exactly is a black job? Really, I would love to know his definition of what a black job is. He's never said what it is. So I don't think we'll ever get to hear his explanation. Harris came out swinging in defense of abortion rights, perhaps the strongest issue for Democrats since Trump's nominees created a Supreme Court majority to overturn the constitutional right to an abortion. Her sharp arguments provided a vivid contrast to President Joe Biden's rambling comments on the issue during his June debate with Trump. Harris said, quote, "The government and Donald Trump certainly should not be telling a woman what to do with her body," end of quote. She painted a vivid picture of women facing medical complications, gut-wrenching decisions, and the need to travel out of state for an abortion. Trump was just as fierce in his defense, saying he returned the issue to the states, an outcome he said many Americans wanted. Really? No, most people did not want that. And we'll get to that in just a minute here. Let me continue. He struggled with accuracy, however, repeating the false claim the Democrats support abortion even after babies are born. By the way, that's called infanticide, and it's illegal in every state. You cannot kill a baby after it's born. You will go to jail for murder. Duh. He stuck to that even after he was corrected by moderator Lindsey Davis. Trump said of overturning Roe v. Wade and its constitutional protections for abortion, quote, "I did a great service in doing that. It took courage to do it, and the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it, and I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices," end of quote. Polls have shown significant opposition to overturning Roe, and voters have punished Republicans in recent elections for it, like Michigan, which now has control of both houses and the governor's seat for the first time in 4 decades. Trump took a Harris talking point and directed it right back at her. It happened when he objected after Harris interrupted him. Trump said, "Wait a minute, I'm talking now. Sound familiar?" End of quote. He was putting his own spin on a line Harris used famously against Mike Pence in the 2020 vice presidential debate when she rebuked Pence for interrupting, saying, "Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking." End of quote. In a divided nation, the election will ultimately be decided by a small slice of swing voters in only a handful of states. And in a nod toward that fact, Harris made an explicit appeal to voters across the political spectrum, including Republicans. She noted that she is a gun owner. She cited the late, great John McCain, a reference to the Arizona Republican senator and war hero whom Trump criticized for being captured by enemy soldiers. And she listed the many Republicans who formerly served in the Trump administration who have now endorsed her campaign. Trump, meanwhile, offered little outreach to voters in the middle, ignoring the calls for unity that framed his summertime convention speech. Harris seized on the January 6th attack on the Capitol to make another explicit appeal to undecided voters. She said, quote, "It's time to turn the page, and if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you," end of quote. Democrats hoped and Republicans feared that Trump would lose his cool on stage. At first he didn't, but as Harris increasingly got under his skin, he went to some dark places. Trump amplified false rumors that Haitian immigrants in Ohio are eating pets. ABC's Mirror noted that local officials say that is not happening, as he argued that the Biden-Harris administration was admitting dangerous immigrants. When Harris pressed him on the array of criminal and civil cases against him, Trump similarly fumed. He accused Harris and Biden of planning all the cases. Referencing the assassination attempt in July by a gunman whose motives are unknown, Trump said, quote, "I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things they said about me," end of quote. Well, really? Buddy, it nicked your ear. You didn't take a bullet to the head. It nicked your frickin' ear, moron. And I even have doubts that it did because your ears healed up pretty good. I still say that was staged. Totally staged. Period. End of story. When pressed on whether he had any responsibility for the Capitol riot, Trump raised his voice, blaming both Democratic Representative Nancy Pelosi of California, who was House Speaker at the time, and the Democratic Mayor of Washington. He said the rioters had been treated so badly and once again denied that he lost the 2020 election. Harris replied, quote, Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. Let's be clear about that. And clearly he's having a very difficult time processing that. End of quote. That was a great line. The debate opened with an unexpectedly wonky exchange on the economy. Harris took on Trump for his plan to put in place sweeping tariffs and for the trade deficit he ran as president. Trump slammed Harris for inflation that he incorrectly said was the worst in the country's history. Trump said people look back on his presidency's economy fondly. He said, quote, I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. End of quote. Harris flatly told viewers, quote, Donald Trump has no plan for you. End of quote. Americans are slightly more likely to trust Trump over Harris when it comes to handling the economy, according to an ABC Nork Center for Public Affairs poll from August. Which I don't understand why people still think Trump will do better with the economy. This is a guy that is bankrupted 6 times. He has filed for bankruptcy 6 times. His casinos have failed. His other businesses have failed. His hotel chain is failing. He is a failure. He is a financial failure. Period. End of story. Harris would be the nation's first female president, but her gender was an afterthought during the debate. She made no references to the historic nature of her candidacy, neither did Trump. And there were no performative moments in which gender was an issue. Who could forget Trump's decision to stand behind his last female opponent, Hillary Clinton, during a 2016 debate? He also called Clinton a nasty woman. Afterward, Clinton said she was creeped out. But on Tuesday night, both candidates stayed behind their podiums as instructed, and there were no explicit jabs regarding gender. So there's that story here. And since we're talking about all the claims made during the debate, let's take a look at some facts. This is the fact-finding portion by the Associated Press. This is also dated September 11th. In their first and perhaps only debate, Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris described the state of the country in distinctly different ways. As the two traded jabs, some old false and misleading claims emerged along with some new ones. I do have to note that the Associated Press called Trump former president. We don't do that on this show. So here's a look. All right, so let's take a look at the claims. Trump said, quote, I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. They've destroyed the economy. End of quote. The facts. This is an exaggeration. The economy grew much faster under Presidents Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan than it did under Trump. The broadest measure of economic growth, gross domestic product, rose 4% a year for 4 straight years under Clinton. The fastest growth under Trump was 3% in 2018. The economy shrank 2.2% in 2020 at the end of Trump's presidency, and a higher portion of American adults had jobs under Clinton than under Trump. During the Biden-Harris administration, the economy expanded 5.8% in 2021, though much of that reflected a bounce back from COVID. Let's see. Harris, quote, we have created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. End of quote. The facts, those statements are missing context. There were 12,188,000 manufacturing employees in the U.S. when Biden took office in January 2021, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Preliminary numbers for August 2024 put that number at 12,927,000. That's a difference of $739,000, close to the 800,000 number that Harris has cited. Also of note is the impact of the COVID pandemic. The number of manufacturing employees dropped steeply in April 2020 by more than 1.3 million. Discounting that decline, there were only 206,000 more manufacturing employees in August than there were in March of 2020 prior to the pandemic. Trump on inflation. Quote, they had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country because I've never seen a worse period of time. End of quote. Here are the facts. While praising the strength of the economy under his presidency, Donald Trump misstated the inflation rate under Biden. Inflation peaked at 9.1% in June of 2022 after rising steadily in the first 17 months of Biden's presidency from a low of 0.1% in May 2020. It's now seeing a downward trend. The most recent data shows that as of July, it had fallen to 2.9%. Other historical periods have seen higher inflation, which hit more than 14% in 1980, according to the Federal Reserve. And let me stop right here and mention 1980. That was Jimmy Carter's presidency. A lot of Republicans like to go back and say, well, we had double-digit inflation, double-digit mortgage rates. People were paying $2 a loaf for bread. Well, I tell you what, back then people could afford it under Carter because wages were higher then. They're not higher now. The rate of inflation has outworked the rate of wage increases in this country since 1981. You can thank Ronald Reagan for that. That bastard. Ronald Reagan, the godfather of the modern-day Republican Party, which is actually kind of funny because if he tried to join the Republican Party now, he'd be called a moderate. It's unreal. Once again, Carter, you could afford it. You could afford a $2 loaf of bread back then because guess what? You were making good money back then. A loaf of bread is $2.55 now, and people can't afford it. Why? Because wages have not increased over the rate of inflation, and you can thank the Republicans for that. Let me see. Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025. Harris said, quote, what you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. End of quote. Trump has said he doesn't know about Project 2025. Yeah, which I say to this. Bullshit. Project 2025 is a controversial blueprint for another Republican presidential administration. The plan was written up by many of his former aides and allies, but Trump has never said he'll implement the roughly 900-page guide if he's elected again. He has said it's not related to his campaign. Yeah, really. Bullshit. Let me continue. Trump, quote, her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth, it's execution, no longer abortion because the baby is born is okay. End of quote. Here are the facts. Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, has said no such thing. Infanticide is criminalized in every state, and no state has passed a law that allows killing a baby after birth. Abortion rights advocates say terms like late-term abortion attempt to stigmatize abortion later in pregnancy. Abortions later in pregnancy are exceedingly rare. Less than 1% of abortions in the U.S. are performed at or after 21 weeks. And those are pregnancies that were wanted, where they have found out that the baby is deformed, that the baby has a fatal disease, that the baby has some sort of illness that's killing the mother. These are wanted pregnancies that have failed. And you abort the fetuses because they're going to kill the mother or because the baby's going to suffer. It's unreal. It's absolutely unreal. You know, Republicans want to have their cake and eat it too, and they can't. They can't do it. Let's see. Harris, quote, what the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. End of quote. The truth, the Penn-Wharton budget model did find that Trump's tax and spending plans would significantly expand the deficit by $5.8 trillion over 10 years. But it also found that Harris's plans would increase the deficit by $1.2 trillion over the same period. Well, I tell you what. $5.8 trillion is explosive. $1.2 trillion isn't. So I'm going to say Harris told the truth there. So there you go. Trump, quote, if she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. End of quote. Here are the facts. Trump's statement ignores the fact that without a law approved by Congress, the president can only ban fracking on federal lands. The federal government owns about 2% of Pennsylvania's total land, and it is not clear how much of that is suitable for oil or gas drilling. Republicans have criticized Harris for flip-flopping on the issue, noting that Harris said in the 2020 campaign that she opposed fracking, a drilling technique that is widely used in Pennsylvania and other states. Harris has since said repeatedly that she won't ban fracking if elected, and she reiterated that in Tuesday's debate, which is a shame because fracking should be banned. You inject chemicals under the ground and pollute the ground and the water potentially so that you can get oil out of the ground. Fracking is ridiculous, and the practice needs to be banned totally worldwide. When talking about migrants and crimes, here's what Trump had to say. Quote, "When you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, whereas I believe 21 million people, not the 15 people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21, that's bigger than New York State. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people are criminals, and that's bad for our economy too." End of quote. Here are the facts. Trump's figures are widely inflated. The Border Patrol made 56,408 arrests of people crossing the border illegally from Mexico in July, the latest figure available for the month. Since Biden took office, the Border Patrol made about 7.1 million border arrests, though the number of people is considerably low because many of those arrests were repeat crossers. The Biden administration also permitted legal entry for about 765,000 people on an online app called CBP1 at land crossings in Mexico through July. It allowed another 520,000 from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to come by air with financial sponsors. Additionally, an unknown number of people crossed the border illegally and eluded capture. That doesn't come close to millions and millions of people monthly. It is also unproven that many of these people are criminals. There have been high-profile heinous crimes committed by immigrants, but FBI statistics do not separate out crimes by the immigration status of the assailant, nor is there any evidence of a spike in crime perpetrated by migrants. In 1931, the Wickersham Commission did not find any evidence supporting a connection between immigration and increased crime, and many studies since then have reached similar conclusions. On people voting that are non-citizens, Trump said, quote, "A lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote, and that's why they're allowing them to come into our country." End of quote. Well, I'm going to use this one. Here are the facts. In recent months, Trump and other Republicans have been repeating the baseless claim that Democrats want migrants to come into the country illegally so they will vote. There is no evidence for this, nor is there any evidence the non-citizens illegally vote in significant numbers in this country. Voting by people who are not U.S. citizens already is illegal in federal elections. It can be punishable by fines, prison time, and even deportation. While non-citizens have cast ballots, studies show it's incredibly rare, and states regularly audit their voter list to remove ineligible voters from the rolls. Trump's comments suggest that not speaking English is somehow prohibitive for voting in the U.S., and that's also not the case. In fact, the Voting Rights Act requires certain states to provide election materials in other languages depending on the voting age population's needs. For example, Detroit. In Detroit, you can get an Arabic voting ballot because they have a large Arabic population there. Sorry, I've seen it. When I worked for what was NBD Bank, which is now Chase Bank, we had documents that were printed. These were the same documents that we used for loan applications and whatever else, that were printed in Arabic because of the large Arabic population in Detroit. So there you go. It's not just the state of Michigan doing it, it's also businesses doing it, because they're catering to the population. The next claim, Trump criticizing the Biden administration. Quote, "Crime is through the roof." End of quote. Here are the facts. In fact, FBI data has shown a downward trend in violent crime since the coronavirus pandemic spike. Violent crime surged during the pandemic, with homicides increasing nearly 30% in 2020 over the previous year, the largest one-year jump since the FBI began keeping records. Violent crime was down 6% in the last 3 months of 2023 compared with the same period the year before, according to FBI data released in March. Murders were down 13%. New FBI statistics released in June show the overall violent crime rate declined 15% in the first 3 months of 2024 compared to the same period last year. One expert has cautioned, however, that those 2024 figures are preliminary and may overstate the actual reduction in crime. Then we have this wild claim. Trump said, quote, "In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there." End of quote. The facts are there's no evidence to support the claim, which Trump and his campaign have used to argue immigrants are committing crimes at a higher rate than others. Authorities in Ohio said there are no credible or detailed reports to support Trump's claim. Job creation. Trump said, quote, "Just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud." End of quote. The facts. This is a mischaracterization of the government's process of counting jobs. Every year, the Labor Department issues a revision of the number of jobs added in a 12-month period from April through March in the previous year. The adjustment is made because the government's initial job counts are based on surveys of businesses. The revision is then based on actual job counts from unemployment insurance files that are compiled later. The revision is compiled by career government employees with little involvement by politically appointed officials. January 6th in the National Guard, Trump said, quote, "I had said I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me." End of quote. The facts? That's false. Pelosi does not direct the National Guard. Further, as the Capitol came under attack, she and then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called for military assistance, including from the National Guard. The Capitol Police Board makes the decision on whether to call the National Guard troops to the Capitol. It's made up of the House Sergeant at Arms, the Senate Sergeant at Arms, and the architect of the Capitol. The board decided not to call the Guard ahead of the insurrection, but did eventually request assistance after the rioting had already begun, and the troops arrived several hours later, because Trump delayed the troops. There is no evidence that either Pelosi or McConnell directed the security officials not to call the Guard beforehand. On auto manufacturers building plants in Mexico, Trump said, quote, "They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China." End of quote. The facts. It's not the first time Trump has claimed the Biden administration is allowing Chinese automakers to build factories just across the border in Mexico. At present, though, industry experts say they know of no such plants under construction, and there's only one small Chinese auto assembly factory operating in Mexico. It's run by a company called JAC that builds inexpensive vehicles from kits for sale in that country. Back to the 2020 election, Trump said, quote, "There's so much proof, all you have to do is look at it." End of quote. Yeah, really, yeah. Bullshit! The facts. The election was not stolen. The authorities who reviewed the election, including Trump's own attorney general, have concluded the election was fair. Biden's victory over Trump in 2020 was not particularly close. He won the Electoral College with 306 votes to Trump's 232 and the popular vote by more than 7 million ballots. Recounts in key states affirmed Biden's victory, and lawsuits challenging the results were unsuccessful. Oh my God, this is a lie, flat out lie. Trump, quote, "Putin endorsed her last week, said I hope she wins." End of quote. The facts. Russian President Vladimir Putin did wryly claim last week that Harris was his preferred candidate, but intelligence officials have dismissed the comment as not serious. Yeah, because Putin is all behind Trump. Period. End of story. Proven over and over and over again. U.S. intelligence agency have said Russia favors Trump, who has openly praised Putin, suggested cutting funds to Ukraine, and repeatedly criticized the NATO military alliance. Harris, quote, Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on that, end of quote. The facts. Trump delivered the line in a speech in March in Ohio in which he was talking about the impact of offshoring on the American auto industry and his plans to increase tariffs on foreign-made cars. It was in reference to the auto industry that he warned of a bloodbath if his proposals aren't enacted. Trump said, quote, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country, end of quote. Well, hey, I don't know if he's talking about the auto industry, if he's talking about an actual bloodbath. Sorry, I don't trust Trump. Don't believe him. Don't believe him when he clarifies on his fake crap. It's unreal. Trump on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Quote, we wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind, end of quote. The facts, that number is significantly inflated according to reports from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, or SIGAR, which oversees American taxpayer money spent on the conflict. The $85 billion figure resembles a number from a July 30th quarterly report from SIGAR, which outlined that the U.S. has invested about $83 billion to build, train, and equip Afghan security forces since 2001. That funding included troop pay, training, operations, and infrastructure, along with equipment and transportation over 2 decades, according to SIGAR reports and Dan Grazier, a defense policy analyst at the Project on Government Oversight. Only about $18 billion of that sum went toward equipping Afghan forces between 2002 and 2018. That's according to a report published by SIGAR on June 2019. No one knows the exact value of the U.S. supplied Afghan equipment the Taliban have secured. Defense officials have confirmed it is significant. To the Central Park 5, here's what Trump said. Quote, they admitted, they said they pled guilty, and I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately, and they pled guilty. Then they pled not guilty, end of quote. Here are the facts. Trump misstated key details of the case while defending a newspaper ad he placed about 2 weeks after the April 1989 attack, in which he called for bringing back the death penalty. Trump wrongly stated that the victim was killed and that the wrongly accused suspects had pled guilty. Trump appeared to be confusing guilty pleas with confessions that the men, teenagers at the time, said they made to police under duress. They later recanted, pleaded not guilty in court, and were convicted after jury trials. Their convictions were vacated in 2002 after another person confessed to the crime. The victim, Tricia Mealy, was in a coma for 12 days after the attack but ultimately survived. She testified in court against the wrongly accused suspects, who are now known as the Exonerated Five. In 2002, Matias Reyes confessed to the crime and said he was the lone assailant. DNA testing matched Reyes to the attack, but because of the statute of limitations, he cannot be charged in connection with it. Which, that's ridiculous, too. Unbelievable. So there's your fact-checking of statements made by both Trump and Harris. Again, the Harris comments are a lot more closer to reality than anything Trump ever said. All right, let's get to our next story. This is John Hanna and Christina A. Cassidy writing for the Associated Press. This is dated September 11th out of Topeka, Kansas. State and local election officials from across the country on Wednesday warned that problems with the nation's mail delivery system threaten to disenfranchise voters in the upcoming presidential election, telling the head of the U.S. Postal Service that it hasn't fixed persistent deficiencies. And that is because DeJoy doesn't want to fix anything. He wants to degrade the post office. In an alarming letter, the officials said that over the past year, including the just concluded primary season, mailed ballots that were postmarked on time were received by local election offices days after the deadline to be counted. They also noted that properly addressed election mail was being returned to them as undeliverable, a problem that could automatically send voters to inactive status through no fault of their own, potentially creating chaos when those voters show up to cast a ballot. The officials also said that repeated outreach to the Postal Service to resolve the issues had failed, and that with the widespread nature of the problems made it clear these were, quote, not one-off mistakes or a problem with specific facilities. Instead, it demonstrates a pervasive lack of understanding and enforcement of USPS policies among its employees, end of quote. The letter to U.S. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy came from two groups that represent top election administrators in all 50 states. They told DeJoy, quote, we have not seen improvement or concerted efforts to remediate our concerns, end of quote. They added this, quote, we implore you to take immediate and tangible corrective action to address the ongoing performance issues with USPS election mail service. Failing to do so will risk limiting voter participation and trust in the election process. End of quote. A message seeking a response from the U.S. Postal Service was not immediately returned. The two groups, the National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors, said local election officials in nearly every state are receiving timely postmarked ballots after Election Day and outside the 3 to 5 business days USPS claims as the standard for first-class mail. The letter comes less than 2 weeks after DeJoy said in an interview that the Postal Service was ready to handle a flood of mail ballots expected as part of this November's presidential election, and as Donald Trump continues to sow doubts about U.S. elections by falsely claiming he won in 2020. That year, amid the global pandemic, election officials reported sending just over 69 million ballots in the mail, a substantial increase from 4 years earlier. While it's likely that number will be smaller now, many voters have embraced mail voting and come to rely on it. And both Democrats and Republicans have launched efforts to push supporters to vote early, either in person or by mail, to bank their votes before Election Day on November 5th. The letter went out on the day the first mailed ballots of this year's general election were being sent to absentee voters in Alabama. Postal Service officials told reporters last month that almost 98% of ballots were returned to the election officials within 3 days in 2020, and in 2022 the figure was nearly 99%. DeJoy said he would like to inch closer to 100% this election cycle and that the Postal Service is better positioned to handle ballots than 4 years ago. But officials in rural states have been critical of the Postal Service for years as it has consolidated mail processing centers to cut its costs and financial losses. By the way, financial losses because Congress directed the U.S. Postal Service to pre-fund 75 years' worth of retirement benefits within a 10-year period. If they had not done that, the post office would be operating at a profit. Period. End of story. In addition to being signed by the current and incoming presidents for both groups of election officials, the leaders of groups that represent local election officials in 25 states were listed. The election officials warned that any election mail returned to an election office as undeliverable could trigger a process outlined in federal law for maintaining accurate lists of registered voters. That means a voter could be moved to inactive status and be required to take additional action to verify their address to participate in the election, the officials said in the letter. Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab, the recent past president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, sent his own letter in recent days to DeJoy. He said nearly 1,000 ballots from his state's August 6 primary election couldn't be counted because they arrived too late or without postmarks, and more continue to come in. Schwab posted on the social media platform X in late August, quote, "The Pony Express is more efficient at this point," end of quote. Schwab and other Kansas election officials also have said some ballots arrive on time but without postmarks, which keeps them from being counted under Kansas law. What's more, Schwab told DeJoy local postal clerks have told election officials that they can't add postmarks later, even if it's clear that the Postal Service handled the ballot ahead of the mail-in deadline. Kansas will count ballots postmarked on or before Election Day if they arrive within 3 days. The Republican-controlled legislature created that grace period in 2017 over concerns the mail delivery had slowed after the Postal Service shut down 7 mail processing centers in the state. That left much of the state's mail handled through larger centers in Denver, Amarillo, Texas, and Kansas City, Missouri. Schwab has promoted the use of local ballot drop boxes for voting in advance, breaking with other Republicans who have suggested without evidence that they can be sources of fraud. Schwab has long said the boxes are more secure than the U.S. mail. He advised voters in a post on X after the August primary, quote, "Keep your ballot out of the hands of the federal government," end of quote. Yeah, you got that right. And that's what I'm going to recommend to everybody listening to this show. If you have drop boxes, put them in the drop box. They get cleared out every night. They're locked away. That's simple. In their letter Wednesday, election officials said colleagues across the U.S. have reported that Postal Service staff, from managers to mail carriers, are uninformed about the service policies for handling election-related mail, give them inconsistent guidance, and misdeliver ballots. The officials wrote, quote, "There's no amount of proactive communication election officials can do to account for USPS's inability to meet their own service delivery timelines. State and local election officials need a committed partner in USPS," end of quote. So once again, I'm going to say, if you have your ballot mailed to you, fill it out, take it to a drop box, drop it off. Do it. Do it that way. Don't rely on the mail. The mails continue to be delayed, and they're going to further delay first-class mail. The U.S. Post Office has said so. So just don't even take a chance with them. Don't do it. Don't be an idiot. Take your ballot to an actual drop box at your clerk's office, at your local clerk's office, for your township or wherever city you vote in. Speaking of claims on the debate, Trump made a claim that Germany is now building normal power plants because their planned exit from fossil fuels had failed. Let's get to this story. This is Stephanie Dazio writing for the Associated Press. This is dated September 11th. The German Foreign Office fired back at Trump's allegation during Tuesday's debate that the European country is now building normal power plants. Trump contended that Germany's planned exit from fossil fuels had failed. The Foreign Office wrote on social media platform X, quote, "Like it or not, Germany's energy system is fully operational with more than 50% renewables, and we are shutting down, not building coal and nuclear plants. Coal will be off the grid by 2038 at the latest. P.S. We also don't eat cats and dogs. Hashtag debate 2024. End of quote. Because that'll be the next one. Data released in March showed Germany's greenhouse gas emissions dropped by 1/10 last year as the use of coal and gas diminished. Germany aims to cut its emissions to net zero by 2045 and is working to ramp up the use of solar and wind power and other renewable sources. The tweet's postscript referenced a debunked rumor that Trump and his allies have spread online in recent days, alleging Haitian immigrants in an Ohio town are hunting and eating pets. Officials in Springfield, Ohio said they have no evidence of that happening. Because it didn't happen. Oh, I got video. No, you don't have video. It never happened. Conservatives are dumb. They're gullible. They'll believe anything that Trump says to them. The maggots will believe anything that Trump says to them. They're ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous all the way around. It's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I want to get to our final story here. This is Amanda Seitz and Laura Ungar writing for the Associated Press, dated September 11th. This has to do with the talk of abortion during the debate. When President Joe Biden gave bumbling remarks about abortion on the debate stage this summer, it was widely viewed as a missed opportunity, a failure even on a powerful and motivating issue for Democrats at the ballot box. The difference was stark then on Tuesday night when Vice President Kamala Harris gave a forceful defense of abortion rights during her presidential debate with Republican Donald Trump. Harris conveyed the dire medical situations women have found themselves in since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the national right to abortion in 2022. Harris quickly placed blame directly on Trump, who recalibrated the Supreme Court to the conservative majority that issued the landmark ruling during his term. Harris told the national audience that women have been denied care as a result. Harris said, quote, "You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because health care providers are afraid they might go to jail and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot?" End of quote. The moment was a reminder that Harris is uniquely positioned to talk about the hot-button national topic in a way that Biden, an 81-year-old Catholic who had long opposed abortion, never felt comfortable doing. Harris has been the White House's public face for efforts to improve maternal health and ensure some abortion access, despite the Supreme Court ruling. Earlier this year, she became the highest-ranking U.S. official to make a public visit to an abortion clinic. Dr. Daniel Grossman, a University of California, San Francisco OBGYN, said he was glad to see Harris highlight the challenges people face in states with abortion bans. Grossman said, quote, "People who have been unable to get abortion care where they live, who have to travel, people who have suffered obstetric complications and are unable to get the care they need because of the abortion bans." End of quote. Harris still hedged, however, on providing details about what type of restrictions, if any, she supports around abortion. Instead, she pivoted, saying that she wants to reinstate the protections of Roe, which prohibited states from banning abortions before fetal viability, generally considered around 20 weeks. Trump, meanwhile, danced around questions about his intentions to further restrict abortion. He would not say whether he would sign a national abortion ban as president. Anti-abortion advocates say they don't believe Trump would sign a ban if it landed on his desk. Bullshit! I think he would. Carol Tobias, president of the National Right to Life Committee, said her group hasn't been focusing on a national ban. Quote, "Because it's not going to happen. The votes aren't there in Congress. You know, President Trump said he wouldn't sign it. We know Kamala Harris won't." End of quote. Trump also falsely claimed that some Democrats wanted to execute the baby after birth in the 9th month of pregnancy, which total bullshit. Actually, let's get to our very final story here. This is Daniel Marins, Kevin Robillard, Lily Peterson, Liz Schalke, and Paul Blumenthal, writing for the Huffington Post. This is dated September 11th. Everyone who has observed Donald Trump in public life over the past decade seems to agree. He is his own worst enemy, and anyone hoping to get the better of him need only encourage his worst instincts. When Trump is dwelling on the 2020 election, making outlandish claims or harping on personal grievances, he is not focusing on areas like the economy and immigration, where voters sometimes give him an advantage. In a clear attempt to get Trump to go off script before a national audience, Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign tried to get him to agree to have his microphone unmuted during the two contenders' ABC News debate on Tuesday, a change from Trump's debate with President Joe Biden on June 27th. Harris did not succeed there. Each candidate's microphone would stay muted while the other was speaking. I saw the debate. They started turning mics on when the other one was speaking with the mics off. Then they'd turn the mic on. But she did find plenty of other ways to trigger Trump's bad habits. On this score and several others, the debate was an indisputable success for Harris, who has sometimes faced doubts about her extemporaneous speaking abilities. A turning point came close to the half-hour mark when Harris laid a trap for Trump that he walked right into, predicting that he would bring up immigration unprompted throughout the debate and mocking him for holding rallies where he discusses fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. She even said people leave his rallies early, quote, out of exhaustion and boredom, end of quote. Addressing viewers, she said, quote, "The one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your dreams and your needs and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first." End of quote. Trump cannot resist the opportunity to defend the size of the crowds at his rallies, a frequent fixation of his. He said, quote, "People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing in and paying them. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics." End of quote. Yeah, bullshit. He also managed to bring up perhaps his weirdest immigration talking point of the night, an entirely unproven racist rumor about Haitian immigrants eating pets in Ohio, effectively confirming her point about his immigration-themed outbursts. The exchange set the tone for the rest of the debate. Harris's overarching theme was that she would not be distracted from helping working families and that Trump could not be trusted to do the same. Trump never regained his footing and embarrassed himself by continuing to take her bait. Which he did. He did easily. I mean, it was like fishing in a barrel. She was just fishing in a barrel. It was crazy. I love it. It was wonderful. I tell you what, we got to have another debate. We really do. This is just amazing stuff. I could just imagine what a second debate would look like. Trump would be over there rattling and rambling about Haitians eating cats and dogs and pets and whatever. Oh, they killed geese too. They've been eating the geese. No, they haven't. Show me one evidence, one proof, one little sliver of evidence that they have. You can't, because it never happened. It never happened. Like I said earlier, conservatives, maggot conservatives, MAGA, Make America Great Again conservatives, the maggots, they are the most gullible people around. Period. End of story. They will believe anything that Donald Trump or J.D. Vance or one of the other talking heads that are also maggots themselves will spew out of their mouth. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely unreal to see in real time, and it happens every single day. Folks, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson, asking you to please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.